Yo, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Look, on this episode, I've come on here to get some stuff off my chest about y'all because I cannot believe a lot of y'all actually believe the NFL is truly rigged. Y'all really think the NFL is the WWE? The outcomes are scripted, it's predetermined. They already got it written in stone when they're going to call certain penalties, when certain teams are going to turn the football over, how they're going to lose the game, how they're going to win it, who's going to get injured. Like, we got to stop this nonsense. We got to cut this out because I at first thought it was people trolling saying that the NFL was rigged, but y'all actually are running with this as facts, and it's not. So I gotta do a deep dive on this episode about why the NFL is not rigged. Like, it is so hard to rig the outcome of a football game. Like, there are so many things, so many variables that are in place that have to happen, and it's just, we're also going to dive into the Carolina Panthers and the Atlanta Falcons, the state of the franchise for both organizations. The Miami Dolphins are returning back to poverty. They easily are going to be the worst team in the AFC East next year. And the Cleveland Browns deal with the devil has forced Myles Garrett to request the trade. The brother has had enough. He wants out of Cleveland. He wants out of the dog pound. And I got a really interesting take on that. Before we dive into it, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon if you're new so you don't miss when we drop new content. Remember, we are not just a YouTube channel. I don't know how many times I have to stress this to y'all, but we are a podcast, man. We are available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. The links are down in the description and pinned comment section below. So there is no reason why you shouldn't be listening to the podcast. If you listen to Apple, Spotify, Amazon, you need to go ahead, check us out, give us a 5-star review if you enjoy, and let's dive into it. You know, it's really crazy to me how a lot of y'all calling me an idiot because I don't believe the NFL is rigged. Y'all truly believe that the NFL is the WWE and all of this is scripted, the outcomes are predetermined, the NFL already has it written down, how the season's going to go, who's going to be good, who's going to make it to the playoffs, who's going to win the Super Bowl, and they always got to make sure that the men in the black and white always put over the Kansas City Chiefs like they haven't lost before. It's just, at first, I thought y'all were trolling when y'all were saying the NFL was rigged. Because, you know, there are times when you look at the certain outcome of some of these Chiefs games, and you're just like, how the hell did that happen? But there are too many jobs, too many livelihoods, too much at stake for the outcome of these games to be rigged. Coaches get fired, might not even ever have an opportunity of making this kind of money ever again if they don't win, if they don't succeed. You know, the NFL, for as weird as it tends to be at times with how the Chiefs win, this is a league that I never questioned the integrity of the game. We bet on these games. We put our hard-earned cash on these games. The NFL promotes gambling so much to the point where they don't even allow their own players to bet on these games. And even if they do, when they get caught, they get punished more severely than if they were to have like a domestic violence case off the field. They take gambling in the NFL more serious than they do any other matter. So if they're this hard on gambling with the players, why would they not be the same when it comes to deciding the outcomes of these games? Look, it doesn't matter if you have part-time officials or full-time officials. They're still going to make mistakes because they're human. And the NFL doesn't make it easy to be a referee because all of these calls are up to interpretation. They're black and white. There's no clear definition of what a catch is. I still believe that it's called it, and you can't tell me otherwise, but the world will truly never know because the NFL doesn't have a textbook definition of what a catch is. That Xavier Worthy play last week, was that a catch? Tell me. How do you know for sure? Exactly. That's my point. So if you don't know, how do you expect the refs to know? At this point, the NFL has to replace the referees with AI robots. Develop them, hit up Elon Musk, get a special set of these AI robots that Elon is starting to make and allow them to be programmed to be referees. So therefore, you have less missed calls, but even they are going to get it wrong occasionally. They're going to make mistakes. When you're a ref and you have to call penalties at a speed of like a million bajillion miles per hour, you're always going to have a high chance of getting these calls wrong because the speed of the game is so fast. How can you keep up with everything that's going on? It doesn't matter how many people you got on the field. You can get it wrong sometimes. I like to see some of y'all try being a referee. Like, the NFL has too much at stake for these games to be rigged. And if they were going to rig the outcome of these games, why would they not do it for teams that are in bigger markets? Like the Chicago Bears, the Philadelphia Eagles are in the Super Bowl, but it's like they should be in it more if it's rigged. What about the New York Jets, the New York Giants? Hell, the New York Jets haven't been to the Super Bowl since Joe Namath. Most of us alive haven't been around to see the New York Jets be to a Super Bowl or be in a Super Bowl. So there are franchises that are in way more appealing cities, way more bigger media markets than what the Kansas City Chiefs are, that if the NFL was truly rigging the outcome of these games, they would be doing it in their favor. Because those are markets that generate more views compared to other teams that get to the Super Bowl, even though the Super Bowl just by itself, just with the prestige around the game, it's perceived to be a global spectacle. So the ratings are always going to be super high. But if you can get a team like Chicago in the Super Bowl, it could provide a little bit of like a moderate ratings boost. So I really don't understand the logic that y'all have when y'all come at me and tell me that I'm an idiot because I don't believe the NFL is rigged. When you look at these referees, they are not allowed to gamble on these games. And if the NFL is hard on the players, they're definitely hard on the coaches. They're hard on the referees as well. And the NBA has already had like some gambling issues. Same thing with the NBA. It's just like at this point, the NFL, I think they handle gambling way better than any other professional sports league. Yeah, they have some dudes who break through the cracks every once in a while, but they don't have nothing as bad as what happened with the Shanghai Otani situation. So I don't believe these games are rigged, and if you disagree, then we're just going to have to disagree. But if you have a logical argument for why these games are rigged, and you're not coming at me in the comments talking about oh, you're an idiot, you're blind, I have no problem going back and forth with you all day about this because conspiracy theories are something that I love to talk about. And the biggest one right now is that the NFL is fixed. They're rigging these games for Kansas City to win because Taylor Swift, with her popularity, she generates so many views, so many eyeballs. She's the most popular woman in the world, person in the world. You got to make sure that the Chiefs win so we can get some more camera action to her. Let's stop this nonsense, please. Let's talk about the state of the franchise for the Carolina Panthers. Last season, they still finished with one of the worst records in the NFL, but last year wasn't about the wins and the losses. It was all about the development of Bryce Young. Dave Canales' first season was successful in Carolina because he successfully was able to rehabilitate Bryce Young. Bryce Young in his last 10 games had 15 touchdowns and only 6 interceptions. I think it's safe to say that Bryce Young truly understands it now, and Dave Canales has lived up to his reputation again of being the quarterback whisperer of the NFL. So for 3 straight years in a row, this guy has resurrected every quarterback that he has called plays for. Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, and now just recently, you can add Bryce Young to the resume. This dude, Dave Canales, has golden hands when it comes to working with quarterbacks. Remember when Andy Dalton was going off against the Las Vegas Raiders? Dave Canales has some magic when it comes to coaching. And with the Carolina Panthers in this offseason, you have the 20th most cap space in the NFL, which is $22.6 million to spend. You need more wide receivers. You got Leggett, who I think he's pretty promising. I think that Leggett's going to be a pretty good player. He did have some moments that made you go, I don't know about him. I don't know about Xavier Leggett, but he also has some good moments where he showed you what he could be. He just needs to be more consistent with the hands, and that shouldn't be too hard to fix. Just buy a jug machine, put it in your backyard, and be on that thing for about 3-4 hours every single day. 1 hour when you wake up, 1 hour when you get back from practice, 1 hour at 6 o'clock, and 1 hour before you go to sleep and take a shower. You know, that's all you got to do. Now, maybe they go after T. Higgins. Maybe they go after Devontae Adams if he's not back on the Jets next season. But in the drive, there's a good amount of wide receiver talent. Not as deep as what we've had in the last couple of drives, but it's okay. And the Panthers do have a lot of draft capital. So they are one good offseason away. Well, the Carolina Panthers are one good offseason away from winning the NFC South. This is the weakest division in the NFL because all these coaches suck. Raheem Morris, garbage. Todd Bowles, mid. I mean, they were willing to make Liam Cohen the highest paid coordinator in the league for a reason. That tells you a lot. The New Orleans Saints, they're about to hire Kellen Moore. Below mid. He got fired by the Dallas Cowboys by Mike McCarthy. It's just the Carolina Panthers, with how promising Bryce Young looks, now taking over the mantle as the Carolina Reaper. I love the Carolina Panthers to win the NFC South if they have a good offseason. They got the money to spend. They got good draft capital. They did a pretty good job drafting in last year's draft as well. And it seems like their owner is now understanding to let the people he hires do their job. So I feel really good about the direction the Carolina Panthers are heading going into this offseason. Whew, man, we got to take a big breath before this one. What's going on with the state of the franchise for the Atlanta Falcons, man? I'm not feeling good about the direction that this team is headed at all. They got talent. They've drafted okay. You got Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Michael Penix Jr. is a stud. You got a really talented offensive line, but outside of AJ Terrell, you don't really have too many great players on defense, and that was pretty evident with how they looked this past season. And I feel with how bad the Falcons defense played in Raheem Moore's first season, it shows that he's going to end up eventually getting fired, because if you specialize in a particular area of the football and that's the worst side of the ball for your team, it's a clear indicator that you're not that good at what you got hired for. If you were a defensive coordinator and you end up becoming a head coach, you're supposed to be good on that side of the football. That should be the most tightened up side of the ball on your team, not the worst. And then the guy just has awful clock management. I'm back on this Washington Commanders loss because, dude, call the damn timeout. What are you doing? Ordering the timeout. It's just, with Raheem Morris, he severely underachieved in his first season in Atlanta. 8-9 is not acceptable. I'm surprised he still has a job. The Falcons, with the collapse they had this past season, starting 6-3 and then finishing 2-6 to end the year, that's a fireable offense. This was the same team that was favorites to win the NFC South. They were favorites. When you still lose the division to the same team that you swept, it shows how bad you are. And they were terrible against any team with a good record that they played. Outside of that, when they had against the Philadelphia Eagles, and when Kirk Cousins caught the holy ghost of Tom Brady in his prime, those are really the only good games they had against competent playoff quality opponents. And for any of you Falcons fans that want to come into the comment section and argue with me talking about man, it's only year one, JT, like, you're being too harsh, the expectations were not that high, that's BS, man. You don't trade for Matt Judon before week 1 of the season and then sign Justin Simmons before the season if you're not going all in. The Falcons believed that they were going to be a playoff team this year. You don't give Kirk Cousins a massive contract in free agency if you were aiming to win this year. Because if that wasn't the case and the goal was the build for long-term success, then you should have been like, okay, we're going to get a quarterback, rather it be Michael Penix or somebody else. We're going to draft the rookie, and we're going to build around him. You would have more money to spend in free agency to get an edge rusher that you so desperately need. And Raheem Morris, back on him, look, he could be the worst head coach in the NFL going into next season. With everything that went wrong for the Falcons this year, a lot of the blame needs to be placed on his shoulders. The unforgivable clock management, waited forever to start Michael Penix, defensive-minded coach, but the defense was a 24/7 open fly zone. There's no reason to be optimistic about the Falcons' chances of making it to the playoffs next season. The only good things about this team is that they got a good offensive coordinator in Zach Robinson. He was a good hire. Hell, they should make him the head coach if they move on from Raheem Morris. Michael Penix is a stud, and the offense is stacked. But other than that, man, it's not looking good. They're under the cap by $8.6 million. 27th in the NFL in available cap space to spend. They hired Jeff Ulbrich as their defensive coordinator. Oh, let me not forget about this one. Hiring Jeff Ulbrich as their defensive coordinator is a really questionable move by Raheem Morris, because when Jeff Ulbrich took over as the interim head coach of the New York Jets after Robert Saleh was fired, The Jets went from having a top 10 defense in the league to one of the worst defenses in the league. And yet Raheem Morris thought the same guy who ruined one of the NFL's premier defenses was a great hire to help improve his defense that he's supposed to specialize in, yet he decides that he wants to hire somebody else to do it. Nothing wrong with that, but it's just, I still don't understand the logic with that. If you have offensive-minded coaches taking head coaching gigs and deciding to call the plays, why aren't you doing it as a defensive-minded coach? DeMeco Ryans, the head coach of the Texans, he calls plays, and he's a defensive-minded coach. I just don't understand that. If your specialty is what got you a head coaching job, one, why are you not good at it? And two, why are you not doing it? Why are you not calling the plays? This is your bread and butter. This is your baby. You know, I don't mean to try to sound overly negative about the Atlanta Falcons a lot of the time, but because I do like this team. I am from Atlanta. I am a Grady baby. If you know, you know. So I do like the Falcons, but I'm really not optimistic about where they're headed going into this offseason at all. The Miami Dolphins had a really good run these last couple of years, but it's quickly coming to an end. Going into this offseason, this team is in complete disarray. I mean, how do your star players not respect their head coach? I've never heard of a situation like this. So Mike McDaniel, no matter how many times he finds players, they still continue to show up late to meetings. He doesn't have the respect of the guys in the locker room. And it's not really surprising. If you look at Mike McDaniel, you cannot tell me this guy doesn't look like Leonard from The Big Bang Theory. He looks like a nerd. I kind of wouldn't take him that serious as a head coach neither, but he wins. It's not like he's one of the worst head coaches in the league. Yeah, he has struggled against good teams, but from a record standpoint, he's probably been the best head coach the Miami Dolphins have had in a very long time. I can't recall the last time the Dolphins were this consistently good going into the season. He has Tua playing good football, but that's the problem. Tua wasn't around this past season, and you have to start Tyler Huntley and a bunch of other different quarterbacks. And yeah, he's supposed to be an offensive-minded coach, but you can't work with everybody. Not every quarterback is, serviceable starter material. Some guys are just good enough to get you by for a game or two. Other guys are just not going to help you survive the majority of the season. And now with Tua getting all this money and yet becoming injury prone, he didn't really have too many injury concerns until this season. And he has injuries that are now starting to pile up. You wonder if he's going to become Chad Pennington 2.0, which has to be the Miami Dolphins' worst fear. You overpaid for the second coming of Chad Pennington. I don't put the blame of this past season solely on Mike McDaniel. I put it on the general manager. The offensive line still isn't good. They neglected that. And you go into this offseason with 29th in available cap space to spend in free agency, under the cap by $15.8 million. How are you going to improve the offensive line? How are you going to address the holes on your roster? So not only are you heading to become the worst team in the AFC East, but you have overspent and overinvested in players that are not giving you a good return on investment. And you're not really drafting all that great neither. If Mike McDaniel gets fired, I believe he gets another head coaching job. But, their general manager, he is responsible for the situation that they're in. And with the Jets getting Aaron Glenn and the Patriots hiring Mike Vrabel, the rest of the AFC East outside of the Buffalo Bills have caught up to you. And you were never on the same level as Buffalo because they've owned you every time they played you under Mike McDaniel. But the Dolphins are becoming a poverty franchise again. These last 4 to 5 years, they were a competitive football team. You knew they were going to be in the playoff conversation. If Tua ever gets injured this past season, Miami is in the playoffs without a doubt because they win when he's healthy. You can call him overrated all you want to and say he's not all that good, but there's not too many quarterbacks that have been consistent as what Tua has been. Okay, he hasn't been good against some of the best teams on their schedule at times, but, is it a him problem or is that a personnel problem around him? It's a reason why he gets the ball out fast, and it is part of the offense, but it also is because they're trying to overcome the limitation of the offensive line issues that they continue to deal with every single year, it feels like. So it looks like the Dolphins are quickly turning into a dumpster fire, and they could turn it around depending on what they do this offseason, but I don't know how they are unless you can trade Tyreek Hill and you can free up some dead cap and you can get some money off the books, restructure some contracts to improve your offensive line. Because that's really all the Dolphins need. You just need to use every draft pick that you have coming up in this drive on the offensive line and all the money that you have available to spend in free agency. Use it to improve the offensive line and maybe get you a Jameis Winston at quarterback. And that's it. You're a playoff team again. You're just too soft because you're not physical. You're not good up front. So if you stop neglecting the offensive line, you could actually be a team that maybe could compete for the AFC. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen. It looks like that dream is over. It was a good run. I still think Mike McDaniel is a quality coach, but man, the Dolphins just are heading towards disaster right now. Aaron Glenn is positioned for instant success as the New York Jets head coach entering 2025. If Aaron Glenn is allowed to coach this team with no distractions, no interference, no weirdness from the front office, I could see him becoming the second version of Mike Tomlin. He's a great motivator. The players respect him. Despite all of the injuries that the Detroit Lions had to deal with this past season, they still came up big in all of their biggest games of the season. And even though, their defense got destroyed by Jaden Daniels, they had about all of their starters, even their backups injured. You had guys that they were signing off the street that they were instantly inserted into the starting lineup. So for that defense to have played as well as what it did, in spite of all of the injuries to their starters and their better players, Aaron Glenn got the most out of what he was given. And that's a sign that he's a great motivator. Because when you can get random guys off the street that have been practice squad guys or just bouncing around teams late in their career or they're just washed and you can still get some somewhat okay play, that's a sign that you're a great motivator. You can get those guys to believe in themselves to an extent where they play better than what they actually are. That's how powerful confidence is. The Jets have an already great defense. They have one of the best defenses from a talent standpoint in the league. You got a great front seven led by Quinnen Williams. You got a lot of decent young edge rushers. Your secondary is really good. Sauce, to me, is the second best corner right now behind Patrick Surtain. He definitely did have a down season, but with Aaron Glenn taking over as the head coach and taking over on the defense, expect this side of the football to revert back to the level that it was previously when Robert Saleh was the head coach. And maybe the defense could be even better than what it was under Robert Saleh with Aaron Glenn being the head coach. Maybe he could get even more juice out of the defense. But Aaron Glenn, in year one, he has a great chance if the Jets can get the quarterback situation figured out to make it to the playoffs. This is already a team that is a playoff caliber squad with the offensive line looking pretty good. Alufashano looks promising. You have Garrett Wilson, who's due for an extension. You're definitely going to get that done. You got two really decent running backs in Braylon Allen and Breece Hall, even though he had a disappointing season. We don't know what's going to happen with Devontae Adams, but the defense is stacked. The offense has playmakers. The Jets aren't far away from being a playoff team. They just need to know what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers. If Aaron Rodgers comes back, I would lock the Jets in for being the 7th or 6th seed in the wild card round next year, because Aaron Rodgers didn't look bad last year. He actually looked pretty solid. Was he the Aaron Rodgers that we grew up watching? No, he wasn't. He was a far cry from that. He definitely is a shadow of what he used to be. But if the offensive line can improve and the play calling can be better, I could see Aaron Rodgers reverting back somewhat to 80% of what he was during his final 2 MVP seasons in Green Bay. And when you have a head coach that a quarterback likes, and you got somebody that kind of has like that Mike Tomlin vibe with them, a guy like Aaron Rodgers could feel rejuvenated, re-energized with Aaron Glenn as the head coach. So don't rule out the New York Jets having a overnight turnaround. Yeah, they've been dysfunctional. They have the longest playoff drought in the league, 14 years without a postseason win. But with what we saw out of the Washington Commanders this past season, after Dan Snyder had to sell the team with new ownership, you get in a new staff, new front office, new vibes. You know, you could have some overnight success if you have the right people in place. And I believe this time around, the New York Jets got it right with Aaron Glenn. With Robert Saleh, he didn't hire the right offensive coordinator, and it costed him. With Aaron Glenn, it looks like he has a pretty good hire as his offensive coordinator, and if you get Aaron Rodgers coming back, that makes his job a lot easier as well. So I really love what Aaron Glenn is going to do with the New York Jets in a few months, as long as they can get the quarterback situation figured out. The Cleveland Browns really made a deal with the devil when they traded for Deshaun Watson, because remember, when they first acquired Deshaun Watson from the Texans, the expectation was that he was going to be the missing piece that catapults them into Super Bowl contention, because Baker Mayfield was coming off a disappointing season. He played through injuries, and Kevin Stefanski in the front office felt like he was holding the team back. So they kick him to the curb. They replace him with Deshaun Watson, who comes with all of these off-the-field issues with the whole massage therapist thingy, all of these allegations coming out. So in spite of that, you still expect to get one of the best quarterbacks in the league, because when Deshaun Watson was in Houston, he was a top 7, almost top 5 quarterback, depending on who you're talking to. And then all of a sudden, you go from being a team that looks like a Super Bowl contender to going back to being what you used to be. One of the worst teams in the NFL, one of the biggest clown shows in sports. Now, with the deal with the devil that the Browns have made with Deshaun Watson, it has tanked the trajectory of this franchise so bad to the point where the best player ever to wear a Cleveland Browns uniform, Myles Garrett, has requested a trade. You've wasted another all-world talent again. You did the same thing with Joe Thomas. The only difference between Joe Thomas and Myles Garrett is that Joe Thomas loved the organization. He loved the fan base. He loved the city of Cleveland too much to ever want to try to win elsewhere. He wanted to try to bring success to Cleveland, and he was unable to. They failed him. And Myles Garrett, they did the same. But the difference between him and Joe Thomas is that he said, you know, it's like, I can get a new extension, and it's just at this point, I paid my dues here. I'm already a Hall of Famer, first ballot if I retire today. I've won Defensive Player of the Year already. I'm already at 100 career sacks. I have nothing really left to prove. Now it's time for me to go to the next stage of my career, which is trying to pursue a Super Bowl at this point. I want to actually play in meaningful games in January. I actually want to know that this long 8 months during the off season isn't going to go in vain. I want to know that I'm actually playing for a team that is trying to win, that has the opportunity to win. And right now, the Cleveland Browns don't have any opportunity to win, regardless of what they do at quarterback, because of how bad of a situation the deal with the devil has put them in. Deshaun Watson was supposed to be the guy that got the Cleveland Browns to the Super Bowl. And instead, he was the guy who brought this franchise right back down to what we've always known it to be. You were better off keeping Baker Mayfield. It was just one down season. But instead, they rolled the dice. And hindsight is 2020. At the time, most of us, if not all of us, expected for Deshaun Watson to be as good as what he was in Houston. The only few people that told me otherwise, I had a homie that told me that when you deal with those kinds of legal issues off the field, you never really return back to being that same player because you're just never the same mentally after those experiences that you have to suffer in court, or it's just people attacking your character. And, he was somewhat right. I do feel like just mentally, Deshaun Watson just is nowhere close to ever being able to play football again. And not just because of the Achilles injury, which he ruptured again, which could be a blessing in disguise for the Browns, but also just even if he ever could get back in playing shape, just from a mental standpoint, everything that he's had to endure with the fans booing him when he got injured, the allegations, people thinking that he's a creep, he's the Diddy of the NFL. Yeah, trading for Deshaun Watson was signing a deal with the devil for the Cleveland Browns because, it looked good. The devil is all about deceiving. And the Browns got deceived by Deshaun Watson because he looked like a crown jewel. He looked like the missing piece to you becoming a Super Bowl champion. And once you got him, he completely poisoned everything that you worked so hard to build. You went from being a dark horse Super Bowl contender to now being one of the worst teams in the NFL. That's how bad the Deshaun Watson trade was. And that's why I call it the deal with the devil. Because that's what Deshaun Watson was. He ruined everything. Everything that made you so optimistic about the trajectory that the Browns were on just completely evaporated when you drafted him because everything just went left. And you only had success when the dude was injured with Joe Flacco. So that tells you everything that you need to know. The only time you were good with him on your roster was when he was unable to play.